Everyone, and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel. Now, following on from Paul's video yesterday regarding the anniversary of the sinking of the RMS Titanic, we wanted to kind of do another video following up from it as it sank in the early hours of this morning. And although 1,500 people lost their lives and perished in the water with the sinking, we wanted to give you a few stories, some humorous, some sort of still got a sad element to them, but what happened to some of the survivors after surviving that terrible incident that took place 108 years ago. Now, the first person we're going to mention is Violet Jessop. She's a well-known person anyway. If you've not heard of her, she was one of the few women, or few crew I should say, that served on all three of the White Star Line ships and survived all of the White Star Line ships with their sort of dramatic incidents. So the first one she was on was the RMS Olympic. Sadly, that collided with a British warship and sank. So she was then transferred to the RMS Titanic, where she was a first class stewardess. Now, during the actual events of last night, 108 years ago, she opted to stay on board the Titanic to try and save as many people as she could. Now, she was actually under order and forced into lifeboat number 16. With that, she survived the journey. It does beg the question, what may have happened if she put her foot down and said no? She was quite a strong-willed character in her own right. Now, following on from the Titanic, she also went on to the RMS Britannic, which is the third and final ship in the White Star Line Company sort of history. While she was on there, it was World War I, it was hit by an underwater mine and sank. Again, she had the privilege of surviving that. Following on from that, I think she gave ships a miss and decided that she'll play her part. She joined the British Red Cross and she was a VAD nurse during the rest of World War I, and an incredible story as well. So she's one of the few that was sort of served on board all of the ships and survived them all. Now, the next person I'm going to mention is a lady called Matilda Wise, and she was on board the Titanic travelling with her husband Leopold, and they were emigrating to America to start a new life. They were quite wealthy people. They could have been first class passengers, however they played it down and bought third class tickets. Now, Leopold travelled on the journey and Matilda made him sew £15,000 within the lining of his jacket. It was all gold as well, so you can imagine the incredible weight that jacket must have sort of been on him as well. So they were emigrating with all their money in secret. They didn't want to big it up as such that they were more wealthy than they were. Now, on the fateful night, both of them ended up in the water. Matilda survived, but sadly Leopold perished in the water wearing that jacket. A few days later, his body was recovered from the water and he was given, well, he was still wearing that jacket, that the jacket was then given to Matilda. Without that jacket and the money concealed in that jacket, she would have been deported back to Britain. With that, she was able to start her new life in America. So, an interesting story, a sad case, but still one that continued. Now, Richard Williams was a Swedish passenger. He was travelling with his father, and on the fateful night he saw the forward tunnel collapse, killing his father instantly. It landed upon him, which isn't good. Now, Richard managed to get into one of the lifeboats. He got into collapsible lifeboat A, and he was waist deep in water for several hours within that lifeboat until the Carpathia saved them. Now, while he was on board the Carpathia, the doctor checked him over, and because his legs were in such a bad condition, the doctor opted that they were going to amputate both his legs. Richard point blank refused. He put his foot down, no pun intended there I should say, and said, "No, you're not going to amputate my legs." The doctor didn't amputate his legs. He couldn't. Richard had put his foot down. No pun again. I shouldn't use that joke too many times, should I? But he later became a gold Olympic tennis champion. So it just goes to show, when you see your doctor, always get a second opinion just in case. And luckily for Richard, he did. Now, another person we're going to mention is, if I get his name right, it is a difficult one, Masabumi Hosono. and he was a government worker from Tokyo, and he was the only Japanese passenger on board the RMS Titanic. Now, during the sinking, he was saved. It's not known whether he got into a lifeboat himself or he used a floating aid like a chair or a door or any kind of form of sort of thing floating in the water to save his life. Now, when he got back to Japan, he was ostracised because he survived when so many women and children perished in the water. He was actually fired from his job, and the name Hosono became a word for cowardice, and he was constantly called a coward in the local newspapers. So a difficult time, a different sort of atmosphere as well, you could say, a different country with rules and things like that. A sad one to come up is a lady called Helen Bishop. Now, she was on honeymoon and she was travelling to Detroit with a new husband, and they were on the Titanic. Both of them survived the journey, well, the sinking I should say, and it's quite a sad story because after the Titanic she was involved in a serious car accident. It was so serious, in fact, that her husband decided that he didn't love her anymore, so was hitching a divorce. And in March 1916, sadly, due to the complications of the injuries, she died. And it's so ironic that the obituary was printed in the newspaper on the same day that her ex-husband had announced that he was going to remarry. Talk about irony. And one of the final people, and it's quite a sad story for him, but we do get a few laughs when we do this talk, is Arthur Priest. Now, he was one of the crew members on the Titanic. He was a stoker, and he, like Violet Jessop, served all 3 White Star Line ships and survived all 3 White Star Line ships. After the final sinking with the Britannic, he then went on and he served on the Alcantara and the Donegal, both of which were torpedoed during the First World War by German submarines, both of which sank. Sadly, Arthur, after this, was forced to retire from his career working on ships because when people saw his name on the crew list, they refused to board the ships. So he was seen as a bad omen, shall we say. So he had no choice but to change his career. Yeah, so that's just a few more interesting stories with the Titanic. If you've got any interesting stories or any family members, do share them with us. We do love a good story. Martin Humby, our good friend, he's shared a story that his relative was a crew member and survived the journey. He also saved 8 people that were in the water, so good on you. Yeah, we love good stories, so please share them. We hope you enjoyed listening to these anyway. I wanted to give a bit of a mix, it's always good. And yeah, stay safe and we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.